Welcome to a new edition of the Neon Jazz Interview Series with the owner and creator of the Vancouver-based jazz record label Infadels, Mr. Tim Reinert. He launched this Canadian-based label during a global pandemic, and he explains why. He's got a great history in jazz and loves it deeply. He's releasing his first album on the label called It Becomes Us, featuring Kenton, Loewen, and J.P. Carter. His stories and insights are fascinating. Enjoy.
I'm always very happy that cats and label owners and people out there throw, me what you're doing and how you're doing what you're doing. So thanks for reaching out.
No problem. Thanks for taking the time to check things out. I appreciate it.
Sure. So talk to me a little bit, Inverted Pyramid, what's going on with you? I know you have the label. You got a new album coming out. Kind of give me an idea of what's going on with you.
I'm not a musician, but I'm involved with the jazz community up here in Vancouver, have been for a long time in different small areas. I MC shows, I have a radio, a jazz podcast, et cetera, and a few years back, I decided that I really wanted to start a label, and there was no real reason for it other than I wanted to try to promote and celebrate some of the musicians who I loved a lot and try to give a bit of an outlet to the kind of jazz that I love. I think jazz is pretty big tent music, but I think there's a lot of room for all sorts of little subgenres and all sorts of stuff. So I decided to start my own record label. Been working on that for a couple of years, and late last year, two local musicians who are pretty well known in the improv and jazz scenes up here in Canada, J.P. Carter and Kenton Loewen, recorded the first release for the album, for the label, I should say, and it's called It Becomes Us. I produced the record. They did all the music, trumpet and drums duet, kind of in the classic of, Wadada Leo Smith and Andrew Cyril and Lester Bowie and Milford Graves and those kind of folks, and half the record is standards, I guess, in that genre. Music like Wayne Shorter and Ornette Coleman and Roscoe Mitchell and Sonny Chirac, and the other half is improvs. So all created right in the studio, no planning, no nothing, just two great improvisers just riffing off the top of their heads, and we're pretty happy with it. So it's coming out in a couple weeks, and that is the Coles Notes version.
I like it, and if you look on paper and you think, all right, what's a guy that likes jazz going to do during a pandemic? The last thing on that list is going to be, I'm going to start a record label. So what gave you this epiphany? Was it fueled by the quarantine, or what made you want to do this right now?
There was a reason, and the reason was that I thought I was going to have access to some studio space. And we literally shook hands on deals the week before things started to shut down majorly up here in Canada. And so that put the kibosh on things for a bit. And then, of course, because of COVID, the studio space that I thought I was going to have access to fell through. I said, screw it. It couldn't have been a worse time to start a label. It couldn't be a worse time to try to get musicians into a tiny room with each other. But for me, I just decided that there was never going to be a great time. There was never going to be a time where all the ducks were in a row. There was never going to be a time where I felt confident about everything. And so to me, jazz is a risky music. It's supposed to be about risks. It's supposed to be about taking chances. And it's supposed to be about taking chances on things that other people don't necessarily like very much. And so to me, the fact that it was probably the very worst possible time to start a jazz record label is kind of what made it the best time to start a jazz record label. And we have an abundance of talent up here, just an incredible amount of talent in Vancouver and the rest of Canada, and relatively untapped in terms of the rest of the world knowing about the scene up here. So I figured a combination of time and access to talent kind of made it the perfect time.
And, seeing it from that perspective, you're right. It's improv. I mean, the whole idea of, you're kind of mimicking what jazz does anyways. You kind of take this situation, you get in there and you try to make something work. And my question to you is this, looking at it as a jazz lover and someone that started a label and has been close to the pulse of what's going on with this art form, how do you see the world of jazz emerging stronger now that the world's starting to wake up and live gigs are getting back and your label's going to pick up because people are going to probably be looking at this from a 2019 perspective of, oh, hey, albums are coming out. But I guess my idea is, how do you see the world of jazz at large emerging in a stronger place because of what we've gone through?
Well, I think that, I'll tell you, I think jazz musicians are uniquely suited for challenge. So for me, jazz musicians are uniquely suited for challenge. And I think that even if you compare jazz musicians to rock guys and folk musicians and blues or whatever, when it comes to dealing with the unpredictability of the music business, I think jazz musicians are uniquely set up to ride through challenges. And when I look at what happened, especially during COVID and especially early days, and to see how many musicians, jazz musicians in particular, just rolled with these huge punches. I mean, jazz musicians were the first people to be affected by this up here, and they're probably going to be the last to go back to normal. And so to see these people work their butts off and put together, whether it's streaming or whatever the issue, whatever the solution they came up with, to see them come out of this basically ready to go quicker and faster than anybody else. I mean, people are putting together gigs like crazy. I'm seeing European tours booked. I'm seeing American tours booked. Of course, the border's still going to be a challenge for a while, but to see how quickly these people are putting things together, I think the general public isn't going to have a choice. They're going to have to pay attention and notice just how hard these musicians are working and how creative they're being. I mean, this is an evolving music. I've always thought that that's one of the great parts about jazz, is that jazz in 2021 is not the same as it was in 2015. It's not the same as it was in 1979, et cetera, et cetera. And I think that having incredibly talented people sitting at home for an entire year, putting their chops together, who knows where the music's going to go after this. I think it's amazing.
As the world wakes up and we reemerge and live music starts coming back into being and things are just kind of ramping and picking up, what do you hope we all realize about the power of live music once we all get back kind of to some level of earnestness with this music?
I hope we understand that art is, in general, it's not really optional. It's not really something we can take for granted. I mean, I'm lucky here in Canada. We have government programs that do help musicians a lot, and really, I would say, stepped up quite a bit right from the beginning, and are still doing that. And that's wonderful. That, I think, is a realization that, this is not disposable content. Whether it's jazz or film or whatever your particular poison is, this is not something we can live without. And, for a lot of us, art was the first place we went to when things started to go really bad. And I think that, federal funding, state funding, however you want to call it, depending which country you're in, I think that goes a long ways. I don't think we can afford to let our musicians drop the way we did at the beginning of this. I don't think we can do that again. I think this has hopefully shown some of us that cultural touchstones like music or film or dance, these things help us get through this stuff. And if we're going to get through another one, and there's probably going to be another one eventually, I hope that we've learned the lesson that this is music, or this is art, that needs to be taken seriously, and that needs to be from the top down. It needs to be, governments need to get involved, companies need to get involved, and they're only going to do that if we tell them as citizens that this stuff is important.
Man, this was wonderful. Your answers were so spot on and profound. It's almost like you gave me a cliff notes to a lot of things that were kind of spelled out over this pandemic with a lot of musicians. So, Tim, thanks for reaching out again. Thanks for sending over the music. I look forward to profiling on Neon Jazz.
Hey, thanks, man. I really appreciate you taking the time.
Thanks for listening and tuning in to another Neon Jazz interview, where we give you a bit of insight into the finest players and labels in Canada, Kansas City, and spots all over the world, giving fans all that jazz. Thanks to Tim for his time, music, and story. If you want to hear more interviews, go to Famous Interviews with Joe Domino on the iTunes Store. Visit Neon Jazz at youtube.com, and for everything Neon Jazz all the time, go to the neonjazz.blogspot.com. Until next time, enjoy the jazz, my friends.
Neon Jazz.